Hello students. Hello students. Today in geography, we'll be looking at the contour representation of relief forms. On our previous demo, we've talked about relief forms and how they are represented naturally. Today we'll be talking about how these relief forms are represented on a topographic map. Contour lines are lines drawn to join places of equal height, level or altitude. The sea level is taken as a starting point in all measures in meters or feet. Contours have intervals. A contour interval is the difference between one contour and the next contour line. The first feature we'll be looking at in this demo is the valley. Valley bottoms are represented by U or V shape. This is how a valley bottom is represented. It's represented by a V or U shape and U-shaped contour lines with the close end pointing up. This is how a valley is represented on a topographic map. This is a valley, this is another valley. This is how valleys are represented on a topographic map. Let's look at another feature, the spur. A spur is a sloping ridge that runs down to a lower elevation, typically to a creek or a river. On a topographic map, it appears as a series of U or V contour lines pointing away from a higher land. This is a spur. If you look into this, if you look closely at this image, you see that the contour lines are looking like a V or a U, and they are running away. They are diverging. They are moving away from a. They are moving away to a lower land. They are running from a higher land to a lower land. They are pointing away from a higher ground. This is how a spur is represented on a topographic map. It's looking like a V or a U that's pointing away from a higher ground. Another feature is the conical hill. A conical hill is a natural elevation of Earth's surface smaller than a mountain. Its base is broad. Look at the base. This is how a conical hill appears naturally. This is how a conical hill appears. This is the base. The base is broad. Land is almost circular in shape and has a narrow peak. The peak is, this is the peak. The peak is narrow, and the contour lines showing conical hills are almost circular with the peak of the hill as their center. This is the peak of the hill, and that's the center. This is how a hill, mostly a hill, is represented in this form. Now, this is the way a conical hill is represented on a topographic map. Let's look at another feature, the round top hill. This is how a round top hill is represented. This is how a round top hill appears naturally. Now, this is how it is represented on a topographic map. This image is not very clear, but if you look very close, you see that there is a contour line inside this other line. The contour lines of a conical or a round top hill forms concentric circle. The inside of the smallest closed circle is the hilltop. This is the hilltop here. The inside, the smallest circle is the hilltop. You see that this feature is different. This contour line is different from the previous one, that of the conical hill. And the closed circle is the hilltop. The hill, generally a smaller, and generally the hill is equal to an area of high ground, and generally smaller and rounder than a mountain, and it is less steep. If you look at this hill, it is less steep. It's not that very. This end is not that sharp, so it's less steep. Another feature is the isolated hill. The contour lines are close together while they are wider apart on flat surface. The closer the contour lines, the steeper the slope. The wider the contour lines, the flatter the slope. On a hill, the contour lines form circle, whereby the values of their elevation increases from the edge to the center. Now, this is how a hill is represented generally on a topographic map. Now, for the isolated hill, if you look at this feature, it's only one hill here. Now, when you look at this one, this is a clustered hill. You have two features, two highlands. This is a hill, this is another hill. But for this one, it is just alone. It is standing alone. That is why it's called an isolated hill. The next feature is a knoll. A knoll is an isolated peak of few meters high, associated with a highland. A knoll is always associated with a highland. It's always on a highland. If you look at this feature now, you have the height of this land showing as 407. That's the height, so it's a highland, and the knoll is always found on a high land. Now let's look at a ridge. A ridge is depicted as two contour lines, often of the same contour, running side by side at the same elevation. That's a ridge The contour lines run side by side. Look at this side, it's also running on this side. It runs side by side at the same elevation for some distance. When the lines diverge, the ridge is either flattening out to a higher plateau or continues to rise with additional contour lines. The next feature we'll be considering is the goal or saddle. A saddle is a low point between two sections with higher ground. A saddle can be a footpath or a road. Now look at how a saddle, look at this is a feature. This feature represents a highland, or you can also say it's a mountain. You also have another highland beside it. Then the gap between these two highlands is what is called a col or a saddle. A col is always a pass, but a pass is not always a col or a saddle. Now let's look at a gap or a pass. A gap or a pass separates two highlands but at lower level. A pass is always a col, but a col is not a pass. I've said that before. This is how a pass is represented on a topographic map. These are two highlands. This is a highland, this is another highland. Then the gap between them is what we call a pass or a gap. A plateau. The contour lines representing a plateau are normally closed space at the margins, with the innermost contours showing a wide gap between its two sides. This is how a plateau is represented on a topographic map, and this is the margin contour. If you look at it, the contour lines are close together at the margins. Now the innermost line have a wide gap, so this is what differentiates a plateau from a hill or other highlands. Escarpment or cuesta. An escarpment is a steep slope or long cliff that forms as a result of faulting or erosion and separates two relatively high areas. This is how an escarpment is represented on a topographic map. Naturally, this is how escarpment appears naturally. Now, when the lines are together, it means that the escarpment is less gentle, is less steep. And when the lines are far apart, like what we see here, it means that the escarpment is very sharp, just like what we are seeing at this end. This is the fault. It's very sharp. That is how it is represented here. Then the next feature we'll be looking at is a gorge. A gorge is represented by very closely spaced contour lines on a map, with the innermost contour showing small gap between its two sides. It's a tongue of land projecting from higher ground into the lower. It can also be called a spur. It's also represented by a V-shaped contour, but in the reversed manner. This is how a gorge is represented on a topographic map. You see the difference between it and the valley is that this one is represented in a reversed manner. It's turned upside down. If you look at the contour lines, they are close together. The next one is the undulating lowland. The undulating lowland is a lowland that gently rises and falls with low level, and is usually shown by irregular or well-spaced contour. This is how the undulating lowland appears naturally. Now this is how it is represented on a topographic map. If you look at it, it looks like a wave. It looks like a wave. So it's moving away. The next feature we're considering is the watershed. The watershed is usually represented by a dashed line or a shaded area on the map. The watershed boundary represents the geographic area that drains into a particular body of water, such as a river, a lake, or an ocean. A watershed is usually found where we have pass or saddle or col. Now this is a highland, this is another highland. This is the space between them, the gap between them. That's a saddle, or you can call it a col. This is where the water that is coming from this highland or this highland is collecting here. That is why it's called a watershed. The water is draining into this area, and it is moving away from this side. It's also moving away from this side. This is where we'll be drawing the curtain on this demo today. Let us look at the assessment session. Question number 1. How is a watershed represented on a map? How is a valley represented on a map? Drop your answer in the comment section. That will be all for today. Thank you for watching, and join us in our next demo.